We've got Phish this month. We've got probably a really cool tab show here coming up tonight. Really, really excited to be hanging out with you all here today on this Friday morning, afternoon, wherever you are in America. My name is Brian Brinkman. I'm a producer here at Osiris Media, do a little bit of work on HF Pod. I'm a producer on Undermine, do a bit of everything. I'm really excited because today joined by a very, very awesome guy that we're going to sit down. We're going to talk through a wide array of topics of all things Phish, both 2021 and kind of wherever the band is historically and where they're at this point in their larger history. Someone I've been wanting to talk to in this setting for quite some time. Dave Calarco, many of you know him as Mr. Miner. He ran and he still runs the fantastic blog, fishthoughts.com, Mr. Miner's Phish Thoughts. This was a blog and a website that was like, to call it essential reading for me in the early years of 3.0 would be a massive understatement. This was one of those sites that I refreshed the morning after each show. I would read on a daily basis to both hear Dave's thoughts on what was going on within Phish throughout their tours as they were coming back in 3.0, but also to hear his perspective on Phish in years and eras prior. Dave and I connected earlier this summer. We had him on for an interview for Undermine Season 2, which is currently airing here on Osiris Media. I sent Dave a list of like 10 questions, and we ended up talking over 2 interview sessions for like 4 hours. So I knew in that time that we would be able to fill a really cool conversation like this with a lot of interesting thoughts, both about where Phish is at right now, what our thoughts were on the summer tour, as well as kind of where we hear this band 40 years into their career and kind of different nuanced periods of where we've enjoyed them throughout. So I'm really, really excited for this conversation. I want to briefly just state to everyone, if you have questions for Dave and I throughout this conversation, please feel free to throw them in the chat, either if you're watching in Twitter or if you're watching on Facebook or if you're watching on YouTube. Please feel free to throw any sort of comments, any sort of questions in here. We'd be happy to answer questions as we're going through this conversation. One last thing before I bring Dave on, I just want to remind everyone out there, HF Pod on Tour is presented by Shift Genuine Cannabis. Please visit shiftgenuinecannabis.com, shiftcannabis.com, I should say. And we are getting ready to announce a couple of amazing live shows that HF Pod will be doing in San Francisco as well as in Vegas. So keep an eye out for those announcements. We'd love to say hi to you all. And we've got a really cool couple of shows planned for both of those stops on the Phish tour. Also want to give one shout out here to our media partner, Jambase. Jambase has done so much for Osiris Media. We're so grateful for their partnership in terms of what we do, and we're so grateful for what they do. Jambase is an incredible resource. People that work there are amazing, and they just do such a great job of analyzing and deep diving the world of jam bands and beyond. There's so much there. All right, with that, I'm gonna bring my buddy Dave on. Dave, how are you, my man?
Doing well, man. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Happy Friday to you.
Thank you. Likewise.
How you doing today?
Doing well. It's beautiful out here. Excited to chat. It's been had a little time to process everything from this summer. I feel like this is timely as fall is just around the corner. So it should be fun.
Yeah, we're in that interesting period where, like, I'm guessing you're similar to me in this sense. Like, I find myself right when a tour ends, I kind of go back and I listen through like a lot of highlights, stuff that maybe I listened to once or twice. I try to find like nuanced little jams that I may have overlooked or that people aren't talking about as much. I try to find a set that worked really well in hindsight versus in the moment. And then we kind of get to this point now, a month out, where like I know the 2 or 3 sets I'm listening to on repeat. I know the jams I'm just like queuing up, and we're 2 weeks out from tour starting, where those jams, those sets are going to in some way loosely inform where Phish is going to be at, but also we're probably going to hear stuff that contrasts the music that we heard this summer. It's that interesting in-between period between the music that was played and the music that's to come.
Absolutely, yeah. Um, yeah, I feel like I've did a lot of what you did in the past or what you're describing. For me, I feel like at this point, I listened to what happened right after it happened, and then for about a couple weeks after tour, and then I just kind of let it go and wait for what's going to come next. So I
Hmm.
may not have as absolutely as nuanced of an understanding of everything as you do right now, but I certainly have strong memories, and
Yeah,
um, I feel like it is an exciting time because fall usually builds on what came in summer, and I think there's a lot to look forward to this year.
I agree. And let's kind of take a step back. And you and I talked in anticipation of Undermine season 2 in I think June, and at that point we were both 2 years out basically from the last time that we saw Fish. Kind
Right.
of didn't know what to anticipate with this upcoming summer tour. I'm curious what, if you can think back prior to the start of tour, what were your expectations going into this tour, if you had any, and how do they meet the reality of what the band presented to us during their first tour back since the pandemic?
Sure. I can't say I had any specific expectations. I actually try to avoid expectations at this point, but I certainly thought they would take a little bit longer to kind of get up to speed than they did. It seemed like they came out raring to go, and
Yeah.
really by the first weekend, when that Alpharetta Tweezer dropped, things were completely on. And so that, in some sense, certainly defied what I was expecting. I figured after such a long time apart, it would take a little bit more time for them to really hook up. However, my hopes was that they would come out this summer with some sort of revamped sound to them. Um, I thought that 2019, while having a lot of really strong high points and some awesome jams throughout, was a little stagnant in the way that Fish usually is always pushing forward.
Hmm.
I felt like 2018 kind of they came out with a new sound after Baker's Dozen, and got a little darker. Trey was using his Leslie more, doing some different stuff that informed the jams of that year. And then in 2019, I felt like they kind of just rode the wave a little bit sonically. Like, not to say that they weren't, being innovative within jams, but I was hoping that this summer they would come out with uh, a noticeable difference in like jamming style on some level.
Yeah.
um and so that was and then it wasn't an expectation per se, but it was certainly a hope. And the reality was that that happened big time, in terms of Trey's whole new setup and Paige's new ways of adding synth sounds and electronic sounds to the mix. Their jamming really did take a completely uh, big step sideways. Like, it was very veered off in a completely different direction than we'd heard in previous years. And that was really exciting to me. And, it was something that really informed each and every show and developed throughout the summer. And as I mentioned previously a minute ago, I think that's something that's only going to develop more as we go into fall now.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I feel as though you brought up 2019, and I feel like it's kind of going to be one of those years that I think is gonna be more interesting as time allows us to, like, re-listen to it, simply because there there feels like a pretty significant shift from 2016 to 2017 in my mind. Like, they challenged themselves with this idea of the baker's dozen, with this idea of no repeats, and by essentially stating that we're not going to repeat it. They didn't say it, but like essentially internally by going after this goal of we're not going to repeat a song over a 3-week stretch, kind of forced their hands to jam a little bit more and kind of put them in a position where they kind of had to play a 20-minute song to kick off a second set. They had to throw a 15-16 minute jam into a first set so that they'd be able to get through however many songs they were going to play in that run.
Yeah,
And that led to a lot of like brilliant creativity. And then like you said, 2018, that's now in their blood. That's now like the rhythm of a show is not just we will play 13 minutes and then do an ambient fade into a new song. Like we're actually going to explore where this song can go over a 5 or 6 minute stretch beyond the first peak. And I loved how in 2018 you got like these peaking jams that would then have this kind of back half that was kind of distorted, kind of
yeah, yeah,
demented. And it felt to me in 2019 like they didn't totally know where to go with that afterwards, and they didn't necessarily have the tools to do it. Like you got cool jams, but you didn't have like the fresh ideas.
right,
Um, and I
exactly.
almost wondered, like, I remember thinking this at some point in 2019, like, are they ready for, do they need a small break, like a recharge, like a reset? And in that sense, like what the pandemic forced was them to take a year and a half off and basically build up like this animosity of like we want to play together.
Yeah,
Trey gets this new, rig in some cases, incorporates new sonic sounds, and they come out and it's like you said, this fully creative idea. It almost feels to me like the first break that they got in their history that was a true positive for them, that they didn't really need to like reset because they were already at a significant high in terms of their capabilities to improv, but it
right.
just gave them a chance to like bring fresh ideas to the table. I don't know. Do you see it that way?
I mean, that makes sense. I mean, the other couple breaks were, internally generated where they felt like they needed to stop, for
Yeah.
differing reasons. And in both cases, I think that reflected musically in the tours right before their breaks. Um, and so this time, I agree, it was definitely different. Like it was kind of not something they chose, and I would agree that their creativity, while you know, as I said, not necessarily completely pushing the envelope in 2019 was certainly not lacking. And
Right.
so, yeah, it's an interesting way of looking at it. I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, they certainly came out with just kind of a intent to really be creative in new ways. And maybe that's a result of just chomping at the bit, in their own houses for a year and a half. Or maybe it was a result of conversations or practice sessions. But either way, they came out, very intentional this summer. And that reflects really from moment one.
Yeah. I found like two competing ideas this summer being, and you hear it every time Trey steps to the mic, which seems like he's talking to the crowd more now than he ever has in the band's history, even like during his chatty periods in like the early 90s.
Right.
Um, where he's just like, he talked about this during the acoustic show, like we're all here, like this concept of like everyone who's supposed to be at the show right now is supposed to be here, and we've all arrived, and he feels, a part of that community. It's not like, and he's always talked about this idea of like it's not necessarily us performing, it's us channeling music out to everyone. But like I felt like there was this competing idea of like joy and gratitude throughout this tour,
Yeah.
but where that joy kind of dominates early 3.0. The thing that we didn't get in the early 3.0 is what you hear here, which is like almost a frustration of like, why the hell was this ripped away from us for a year and a half?
Yeah, I hear that. I said that a lot throughout the summer, is that there was this real energy to not only the band, but in the fan base and the community as well, of like not taking this for granted anymore, like realizing that it could end just
Yeah.
like that. And who knows what the future is going to bring. And there was a real sense of, the moment every night they step to the stage. And I feel like that sense of gratitude, that sense of really not taking things for granted at this point, caused them to really kind of go for it every night, you know? And I just felt like a real positive vibe permeating the entire tour, both musically and interpersonally, socially. And it was weird because we're all wearing masks and it's this new situation. And, um, but at the same time, you know, we all kind of made it happen. And it was a very celebratory feeling of the Phish community that existed, you know, all tour, all summer, and really culminated at Dick's. And you know, I foresee that moving forward, but you know, nothing's going to replace that first tour back after this. You know, I think there was a very unique energy that can't be replicated moving forward, and so I totally echo what you're saying and felt that very strongly.
It's interesting what you just said. Like, I hadn't really thought about it that way, but like, I'm starting to think like, there's so many differences between like being in like within a Fish tour as it's happening and like either going to the shows or webcasting and listening back like in the moment and not knowing the directions it's going to go in and where it's how it's going to conclude. And then it becomes like a moment in time and you look back on it as a memory. And for example, like I've always been fascinated, like what would it have been like? I came into Fish in the 2.0 era, but like what was it like in the fan base, like literally in mid-November 1997, when like the band is every single show is seems to be like a higher high from the night before, and how different was the perception versus what it looks like when you say just the words fall 97 to any fan and like their eyes lit up, they start smiling, they start like throwing out, jams here and there. And I think it's really interesting to think about, like, I echo what you said earlier of like I tried to go into this tour without expectations. That said, it's almost impossible for me not to.
Right.
And like my expectations of this tour were essentially honestly on par with like 2009 to 2011 Fish, just in the sense that I was like, I kind of expect the band to need to get their sea legs back and to, figure each other out again. And who knows, like on an individual level, how freaked out these guys are about playing live in front of people right now. Like they were one of the first bands to do a full tour after all of the, amidst all of this, let's be honest.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt.
And yet they came out, and to your point, like I found really interesting moments in Arkansas, even though that felt like a very hesitant band in some cases.
Sure.
But night 2, we get that incredible Carini. Night 3, we get this wide, expansive chalk dust that doesn't peak, but just like touches all these different areas of musical exploration and communication.
Yeah.
And then night 4, we get this tweezer that like it sounded like a late night set by like minute 25. Like they didn't sound like they were playing in front of an audience.
Yeah, that's funny you say that because I get this vibe from that jam, and I did almost immediately that it sounds like four kids like being let loose in their basement, you know, after not seeing each other for so long and really just like playing and conversing with each other and this really like with this real childlike excitement and this real like lack of thinking in the moment, you know, just really kind of this instinctual like play. And it was a very conversational jam in the sense that like it sounded just like a bunch of friends like shooting the shit after not seeing each other for a really long time. And
Yeah.
you know, it didn't seem like they really like, you know, it's this really long 30 plus minute jam, but I don't feel like I feel like it was so just organic and natural the whole time. Like I don't think they were trying to push it further or it just like kind of unfolded in that way. And the excitement really translated in the first weekend in those jams that you're talking about,
Yeah.
specifically the Carini, the Chalk Dust, and then the Tweezer. Like they were really like these high energy jams, you know, where like you could feel the enthusiasm coming from each of the guys on stage. And like, you know, none of those jams went particularly deep or out or abstract, but just like real incredible energy throughout. And then, you know, it kind of that weekend peaks with that Tweezer, and it felt like at that point, like things were moving to the next step at that, you know, at that point, like
Yeah.
that was their return weekend, and like at some point we were like, well, are they going to keep playing 30-minute jams every night? But it really, I think that's really just a facet of how excited they were to be back on stage again. And when I look at those jams now, and even in the moment, that's really like the feeling I got was like just like celebratory, like we're back, we can do this again, this is all possible again. And it was really cool to hear those jams at the time, especially given the thoughts that we were thinking, it might take them a week or two to even get to a point where they were going to try something like that.
Right, right.
And they had no hesitation at all. They were ready to just go.
Yeah, I had a buddy text me during that, who one of my favorite people to talk Phish with, but tends to be very skeptical of like where the band is, and like the first to like criticize the song selection or like this or that, and just texted me. He was like, "I'm 23 minutes into this Tweezer and I have no idea what's happening." And I was like, "That's all I need, right? Like if you're convinced 4 shows in, like that's all I need."
Yeah.
Um, yeah, one thing I wonder, and I talked with Ryan from Trey's Guitar Rig about this, but I'd really be curious your thoughts. Like, um, I feel in some senses like one of the best parts and one of the things that made this tour what it was from the first weekend, but was also like a massive risk that the band took, was Trey's new synthesizer pedals and whatever the Jedi pedal is. And I think back to like, I don't know if we ever talked to, maybe we have, but like summer 2016 was a tour that like didn't totally work for me. And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
felt
I
like,
hear you.
like there's moments, but like I felt like Trey was so reliant on the Marimba Lumina and on like certain bits of technology that just didn't totally push the band's jam. It kind of led them to a lot of dead ends. Whereas here, every time he hit that synthesizer pedal and you
Yeah.
heard what sounded like is Trey playing the keys, is that Page? I have no
Yeah, it
idea
took
what's
me like a
happening.
little bit to start realizing and separating who was who at some point, for sure.
Like it's crazy to me, the idea that, technology is such a part of the band that sometimes they introduce it and it just simply doesn't work. And it leads to a tour where there's not as many ideas and someone incorporates a new sound and it just leads to like jams kind of fading out. Whereas here it was like every time Trey hit that effect, Page
Yeah,
would move to the Wurlitzer, Fishman would essentially take over the jam, and
yeah,
he would like kind of push ideas like, but what a risky move to do. Like, you would almost think that they would say, all right, let's just see how we sound for a couple of shows
right.
and then maybe bring these new effects. But like, it's kind of what Phish always does, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Phish wouldn't be Phish if they didn't keep pushing forward and, changing and um, introducing new ideas. But yeah, I mean, what you're talking about, like Trey's new sounds, really opened up a completely new universe for the band. Like between his sounds, Page's sounds that he added, Page added a lot more electronic sounds this tour than we've ever heard him play before, and you know, it really provided an entirely new sonic palette for the band to improvise with. And it's almost as if now there's like these two versions of Phish on stage at any given point. There's like this classic version of Phish in which Trey uses his very clean tone that we've all fallen in love with over the past 2 decades. Page on grand piano, everything in its right place, if you will, And then they have this completely new school sound that is triggered by Trey veering off into these new, more synthesized, meaty type of sounds. It's like a switch is flipped at some points
Yeah.
in the jam. Trey hits a pedal, Page immediately responds, and the band is completely off into like this alternate style of jamming. It was like new school 2021 Phish. And so,
Yeah.
there are many different examples throughout the summer where like they're within like this classic sounding jam. Trey has this idea to just go off in another direction, and then boom, in a split second, they're like moving into this whole other movement within this jam, and it sounds 180 degrees different than it did 30 seconds ago. And it allowed them to really push jams farther. It allowed them to really kind of introduce new ideas, new styles of interaction, where sometimes Trey would be using these new sounds, but not necessarily leading the melody. And Page was a lot more prominent. And as you mentioned, Fishman, God bless the guy. He is just like the maestro behind the entire experiment at this point. Like, to say he was beyond this summer would be an understatement. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of what I was talking about with my hopes for the summer tour, is that they would come out with something completely new that we hadn't heard before. And when if you were to 2 years ago throw on one of these types of jam segments that we're talking about, it would be like virtually unrecognizable for the band we knew at that point. And
Right.
that's really the type of innovative Phish that I love. I'm never adverse to them introducing new things.
Yeah.
Whether or not it works immediately or whether it takes time to integrate, I'm just always pro innovation, pro change, pro new, because that is the band's ethos, from moment one of their creation. And so this summer was super exciting in that respect. And so many of the standout jams from the summer are informed by this new style of improvisation, these new sounds. And it's just super exciting. It's just it really kind of gets me super amped when you're in amidst that. It's just I don't know, it's awesome. It's really freaking awesome.
You said a lot there that I want to take into a number of directions. The first thing I want to say really quick, I want to give a shout out to listener Taylor Franklin, who made a very, very important point here. The page sounds that you're talking about, those started like Baker's Dozen, 2018, 2019. And I think one thing that's really, I was thinking about this a couple weeks ago. I was watching the Baker's Dozen version of Blaze On, which was a really, really cool jam that I saw at one of the 3 Baker's Dozen shows I saw. And it was great to watch it again. Everything about watching the Baker's Dozen just like brings me joy. But like one thing I noticed that I don't know if I was thinking about at the time, because I was really excited that Simply Put, the band was jamming at a heavy level again, was Trey is really behind the scenes on that jam. He's not forward throwing out a riff and like confidently throwing a riff out and saying, this is the direction this jam's going to go in for the next 5 minutes. And we're just going to toy around with this like he was doing this summer.
Yeah.
But what really made those jams was Page would go to his Moog 1, he would go to his synthesizers, and
Yeah.
he would add these textures. And along with that, like Page's record that came out earlier this year, maybe We're the Visitors, I'm guessing that's a record that seems right up your alley that he
Yeah.
recorded
It's
after
freaking
going to
awesome. I love
Iceland.
that. Yeah.
Like my first thought after hearing that record was like, I hope Phish brings some of these songs in, like in a la like What's the Use or My Left Toe.
Right.
And rather than bring them in, they almost like use those songs as like sonic inspirations for the band to jam off of. But you like combine it with this Trey who is out front, very confident. He has a riff in mind, he throws it out, he
Yeah.
distorts it, and the band goes from there.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel you. And yeah, I mean, while Page did start those synth sounds, or some synth sounds, back in Baker's Dozen, like I definitely feel like, and granted, I'm not a technically inclined musician, but I feel like there were new sounds this summer, and new
Yeah.
new ways of employing them for sure. So like I don't necessarily see it as just like a rehash of what he was doing then. I feel like he took a whole nother step forward in
Yeah.
pushing jams with these electronic sounds in a new way. But certainly a progression from that point. Um, but yeah, I think it's awesome that they've kind of integrated more technology and electronica into their music. I've always been a huge fan of electronic music. I know not everyone in the Phish scene is, but especially in the years where Phish wasn't playing, I got really deep into different styles of electronic music. And I think it's just super cool to see them embracing something that has been, you know, somewhat foreign to their musical mixture for so long in their careers. And now kind of integrating it in a way that is pushing them forward in new directions. And I wouldn't have pinned them to do that, several years ago. That's why, like, when they started doing that in the Baker's Dozen, when Page started doing that, everyone was like, our eyes popped open, like, whoa, what's this, right? Like, this is a new sound. And then this summer, that happened like exponentially, with both Phish and with both Che and Page, and I think a little with Mike too. Like, he also has an array of sounds that he would kind of delve into when they went into these styles of jamming that were not just, his usual tones. And so, yeah, I don't know where I'm going.
No, I agree. I mean, to me, what makes so much of the summer so special is that, like, it's this combination of the band looking forward, but also them, like, integrating aspects of their past where you have, like, that electronic sound that, like, peaked up a little bit towards the end of 1999 and 2000, where, like, they're writing Sand, they're writing First Tube. Like, Trey's clearly got his head in what is happening in, electronic music. And that was coming on the heels of, like, an ambient year where they're listening to, like, how do we play almost nothing but, like, and play almost, completely as one, but really communicate in this deep, deep musical way. But now, 20 years later, the technology is so much more improved.
Yeah,
And they're also throwing into it this, like, kind of, it's like they took, how in summer 95, every jam is just this, like, it's all like sectional.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's like, how do we distort a normal guitar riff and then play that for 5 minutes until it almost becomes, unlistenable to some people, but allows us to tap into something bigger than who we are. That sort of like sectional jamming where, like, they'd come up with an idea and then they'd move into a new idea, which kind of emerged in 2012, but, like, is now being played across 35-minute long jams
hmm
with technology,
hmm
with this, like, focus on electronic music that doesn't necessarily need to peak. Like,
right,
I think a perfect example is, we talked about this offline, but the Dick's, Everything's Right,
yeah, yeah,
where, like, there's no peak in that jam. There's no,
totally,
like, we're gonna move into D major and we are just gonna, like, glow sticks galore and everyone's got their hands up. Like, that would be so wrong in that jam. But
yeah,
instead, like, they find this, like, sonic groove around 21 minutes that, like, the whole venue is tapped into,
totally.
and it's coming after multiple sections of the jam. I don't know. There's a lot there.
Yeah, definitely. And when you look back at like '99, like you were talking about, like I feel like they were employing like the ideas of electronic music within their own kind of
Yeah.
sonic spaces that they had established. And now they're kind of like taking it a step further with these new sounds, and it's really creating this new style of music. But yeah, I mean, I think it's awesome when they can play a 20 to 25-minute plus jam and not have one of those peaks. I mean, and this is what was so exciting about some of the best shows this summer is that, like, for better or worse, Phish has like improvisational cliches that they kind of move to sometimes,
Sure.
whether it's like moving from a minor to a major chord and kind of like Trey stepping forward and like they peak in these like really blissful places, Um, and while I love those cliches and like, I'm all about them, it's, so many of the jams this summer were super expansive and didn't have that,
Mhm.
which is really shows like the um I suppose like the intent to be different, and they're not necessarily falling back on, what they know to succeed and what they know everyone will love because everyone loves that stuff. How can you not, I mean, that's why we're there on some level. Um, but when you look at something like the last night at Dick's, they play 2 sets of music that's virtually all improvisation, and they never once fall back on any of these generic or cliche ways of developing jams. Like everything is super fresh, super original, and just really completely innovative in the moment. Every jam in that show is different from the one before.
Yeah.
There's no like repetitive motifs. It just like, and we both mentioned this last night when we were kind of talking a little bit, is that, that's really on a very short list of shows that are among the favorite I've ever been to. Because that just doesn't happen too often. You don't get that amount of original, innovative jamming in a given show virtually ever. It's very
Yeah.
rare,
Yeah.
and we're talking first set, second set, and moving throughout. And it's just that night really kind of exemplifies and was a culmination, I feel, of all of these ideas we're talking about, and they kind of like put them all together into this like masterful performance.
Yeah, that show has a very special place in my heart. Like it was my third show back from the last shows I saw prior to Dick's 2021 were Dick's 2019. And I really enjoyed aspects of night one and night two. The Carini on night one was a stunning placement, a stunning jam. Night two,
Definitely.
we talked about the Everything's Right, but Dick's night three, as we're talking, like that was a show that, you know, solid opener with MoMA, incredibly placed McGrupp, and that just felt like now we're into the show, and you get this sand that most set one jams off of sand of this tour have been quite good. They move
Yeah.
into a new terrain and they're really interesting, but this felt very different. And then it fades into Sigma Oasis, which, okay, we haven't played this in a week and a half. It's one of our newer songs. It's off the new record. Like we want to keep getting this in the rotation. I didn't expect it to do anything. It's one of my favorite newer songs that Phish has ever written, or of the last like 5 or 6 years. And that goes into this like crazy sonic territory, ends up in all of these dreams, which is like a rare, just gorgeous round room ballad. And then you
Absolutely.
end with two classic Phish songs in Reba and Gin, both which had very fresh playing in them. And
Yeah.
like without going through song by song in the second set, like you got that same type of unexpected, new, old, innovative, deeply creative, like however they ended up in that groove for Catapult,
Yeah.
which, when they started playing simple, I was like, cool, we've seen a couple of great simples this tour. And then this simple went in a completely different direction from the Arkansas and Deer Creek version
Yeah.
and lands in a song that, like, is 35 performances total, 7 since 2000. It's like only appears when the band is like really feeling it that night. And it's played to the tune of like one of the most hypnotic grooves I feel like I've ever heard from the band. And didn't know if I'd ever really see the band land in a groove like that.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It was yeah, like you're saying, like each piece of that show brought something new to the table. Um,
Yeah.
and you went through the first set. Maybe I'll just go through the second.
Yeah, do it.
But yeah, I mean, like that final section of "Set Your Soul Free" was like some of the best music I've heard them play in a really long time. Like
Yeah.
super heavy. And they end that in probably the best new ballad they've had in a long time with "Lonely Trips." Just like perfect placement, beautiful song. And then the whole simple Catapult Meat Stick segment is just pure new school Phish. Like that shit was
Yeah.
not like couldn't have happened in any other point in their careers except for Summer 21. And that's
Yeah.
why it's so awesome. Like that, you couldn't take that jam and tell me it was from last year. You couldn't take that jam and tell me it was from 10 years ago because they didn't sound like that at this point. And in fact, there's
Yeah.
really no other jam at any point in their career that sounds like that jam. And that's when you know shit's super special, is when like this moment in time is unique to this moment and sounds like nothing else that's ever been played. And that's absolutely what was going on there, you know? And you know they're feeling it when they like are throwing humor on top of like this most like insane music, and it's just like the fishiest mixture of elements at that point, you know?
Right.
And they fade into this really full-on version of Ruby Waves when Trey's just like
Yeah.
unleashed the guitar solo like he hadn't done at any point in the night to that point, you know? And so like, and then they fade out into Bliss, which, as I said, like to you last night, I've been waiting since 1996 for them to like take that piece of music and put it into a show in that way, you know,
Yeah.
very strategically. And you know, Billy Breeze, most events, Hood, it's like it's a flawless set. And when you can say that about both sets, like, you know, you've got something special, you know?
Yeah.
And I said that from the moment the show ended, is like, that's one of the best nights ever.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're a month out right now, and I still feel that way.
Yeah. I mean, it reminded me in a lot of ways of, so I've seen the last 4 years of Dick's, and then prior to that, I saw 2012. And,
Yeah.
my Dick's experience was usually like 2012, 2017, 2018. I walked out of the Friday night show just being completely exhausted and feeling like I don't know how the band could do anything more than this. And aside from 2012, they couldn't do anything more. Like that was the show. And it felt like I walked out of this year with night 3 being that, where like I walked out being like, I would have never written that set list on paper. I would have never imagined those jams in those places.
Yeah.
Um, you think about like Sigma Oasis, Set Your Soul Free, Simple being, the real, and Ruby Waves being the real like standout big jams. And of those, the only song that has any sort of true history in Phish is Simple.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
Sigma Oasis, Set Your Soul Free, and Ruby Waves are still, obviously we have like, the 39-minute or 38-minute from Alpine Valley in 2019. We have some really solid Set Your Soul Frees throughout the last 4 or 5 years. But like these are songs that are still figuring out who they are and what they are and where they should be played. And should we
Definitely.
jam at this time, or should we just try to peak it and, make people really happy to hear this song? And like, you get this, like you said earlier, this new school, old school Phish, where that like simple catapult, simple meat stick
Mm-hmm.
feels plucked out of 1994, but played with music that is only possible like 38 years into their career.
Yeah. Yeah. It's awesome. And that Sigma is like, that's the first time they've even ever improvised out of it. And that went deeper than anything that night. That was crazy. Yeah. I mean, it was just a very quintessential night of Phish that really had all elements of their game integrated in the best form. You know, I don't see how, anyone would disagree, but that's just me.
we're a fan base of disagreeing over this.
That's true.
But no, I'm on the exact same page with you on that. One other show that comes to mind just based on what you're talking about is the first night of Deer Creek, where you have these two 25 plus minute jams.
Yeah.
I guess Simple is just short as 24, but nitpicking there. But like this Blaze On peaks 16, 17 minutes in with, it reminded me a lot of the Twist from November 1st, 2013. The night after the Wingsuit show, where when like an under pressure jam, where like chordal, it feels like they're writing a new song on the moment.
Yeah.
And it's just like this kind of, it's this gorgeous 27-minute long song.
Yeah.
Really cool ending section. But like 2 songs later, you get Simple that feels like it descended from another planet. And like none of those 2 jams should be at different shows. Like they shouldn't be right next to each other, basically.
Yeah, it was awesome. That was actually my first show back. I wound up skipping the first weekend because I was a little skeptical of the whole Southern COVID situation. Wasn't necessarily ready to go. And so I flew out to Deer Creek for my first shows. And, when they dropped that show, my first show back, I was just like, a kid in a candy store at that point. But yeah, those two jams are among the best of the summer. Like they're both like again like completely unique, completely different. And the Simple really is one of like my favorite jams in recent years slash of all time. Like it's the combination of groove and psych playing and just like it's got everything I'm looking for in a Phish jam, and it really is just it's an all timer. But yeah, I mean that show is fantastic. Even the first set, they start off with like 50 minutes of like really high key improv. That Sand in the first set is really really good too. But yeah, I mean that night is probably my second favorite show of summer. I was unable to go to the Shoreline shows due to childcare. I had to be taking care of my son, and so I can't necessarily put those on my list of experiences. Although where had I been at the first one, probably would be on that list. But the Deer Creek and the Last Dick show were really just special nights for me, and I just feel like have music in them that we'll be listening to 20 years from now and raving about.
Well, you and I are both in the camp of family obligations over going to Shoreline, because I originally had tickets for Tahoe that I sold a couple weeks in advance, like before the announcement was even made, because I just knew I had people coming into town for Dick's. I had to I couldn't leave my wife with our two kids for like that and then go and do Dick's as well.
Yeah.
And I was watching it from my couch and I was like, okay, 20 minutes into Soul Planet. This is really good. Okay, we're 30 minutes into Soul Planet. What's going on? Okay, now it's a 40-minute jam. Well, it's just like this moment of like, can I just step back in time and book a flight to
Yeah,
San Francisco?
so my son's mom had a trip to Europe postponed several times during the pandemic, and she wound up scheduling it for that week long before Phish had even announced they were playing this summer. And so I was originally going to miss the Gorge in Tahoe. And then they changed it to Shoreline, which is an hour from where I live. And so I wound up not going to like Phish shows an hour from where I live. And then that happens. But I was doing the same thing. I wasn't watching it, but I had it on my headphones on the couch. And I was like, all right, like this is still going. This is still going. And it's a rare, those jams, those long ass jams, they can vary a lot within. Often, there's like a lot of peaks and valleys in them. There's a lot of mellow points where they like almost reset the jam historically. And this one was not like that at all. Like they are shot out of a rocket, and like that jam never really has any lulls and never really has any peaks either. It's very consistent throughout, and it continually gets better as it's going, which is really awesome. Like I feel like the first half of the jam is really great, but it's also it's within the realms of like what we've been hearing Phish do that summer. And then the next half of the jam, like the second 20 minutes of the jam, really gets more abstract and super cool. And so it's like, they're feeling it they're feeling it when they even push a jam that far. But when it keeps getting better throughout, it was just like, at some point I was like, I just closed my eyes and I was like, all right, like I'm experiencing it this way. And that was cool with me. I've learned at this point that like, you're going to see what you're going to see. You're going to miss what you're going to miss. And that's just the way it is. And yeah. I don't really get miffed about it anymore. And so I was just like kind of in awe of what was happening in my own little world at the house. And it was freaking cool. It was really awesome. That jam is a really special jam for that reason, is that it just is so consistent for a jam that long, and it really shows their intent to explore in a way that we hadn't, in a way that we had seen actually all summer. All summer there's a lot of really long jams where, and it kind of gets accentuated in this instance with the Soul Planet, where, Trey has exit points for these jams, for so many jams in the summer, for like the Alpharetta Tweezer, for that Blaze On, for from Deer Creek, and a lot of other ones. Is like, there are points where he could have ended the jam and gone into another song, and it would have been an incredible jam. But he kind of, throughout the summer, many different points, kind of just blows by these exit ramps and continues going forward. And, that is really underlined, indelibly in that Soul Planet, where that jam probably could have ended 3 different times and we still would be talking about it on the podcast here. And yet he keeps pushing it and keeps pushing it and keeps pushing it. And eventually seamlessly moves out of it into the final hurrah. And it's really awesome when they really, because it really comes down to what he wants to do on some level, insists on continually pushing and pushing and pushing. And so it was really special in that sense. And yeah, like I wasn't timing it as it was going, but like it just kept going. I was like, this is a really long one. This is a really long one.
Well, they've been liking those really long jams a lot
more lately.
Yeah, like obviously, the Ruby Waves, you've got what you had in 2017 where like, Jam Filled Night, for example, has a almost 30-minute Lawn Boy, a 33-minute Cross-Eyed and Painless, a few others from the rest of the Baker's Dozen that went, 25 plus minutes. But then you get the Ruby Waves from Alpine Valley, which always to me felt, and I think it makes more sense now 2 years removed, but it felt like they were really trying to play a near 40-minute long jam. Like there's moments where it felt like that jam was ending and then they brought up a new segment and they kind of like said, okay, we are consciously pushing through this. 6 months later you get the Tweezer from MSG, which felt slightly more organic to me in terms of its expansiveness and delivery. You got that beautiful middle section. But one thing that I found about this tour was like the 30 plus minute jams didn't feel like they were coming out and saying we want to play this. So no matter if we go into like a dead end, we're still going to push through. They just ended up finding new ideas organically. And like listening to that Soul Planet again, I don't think it was a wrong decision to segue into the final hurrah. Like I think it's so cool when like a new rare song like that becomes the exit point out of a jam.
Mm-hmm.
But like they could have played for 90 minutes. Like that jam was
sure
in like minute 46, they were coming up with new ideas.
Yeah, they were just fully locked,
fell out of the
sure.
sky.
Yeah, no doubt. They were in a fully locked, synced situation where, was there not an audience there that Trey was thinking of? Probably could have just kept going.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, one thing that we were talking about, like, and I'm just constantly fascinated by this is Phish is about to reach their 40th year, which seems ridiculous in a lot of cases. If you've been listening to Phish for a long time, like there are all these periods that you go through where you're like, this is the peak period of Phish. Okay, Phish is broken up. Okay, Phish is back, but like it's not the same as it was. Will it ever be the same way again? And we're kind of at this point now where like they're almost 40 years into their career. And I'm thinking now about, and you have to kind of think about like the Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, the Grateful Dead, even like you have to think about these bands that existed as rock behemoths and were able to just announce a tour and they sell out their venues without any sort of, effort. Like Phish announces a tour and Deer Creek sells out immediately, Dick sells out immediately type of thing. But like they seem to be the only one that's consciously trying to make new music.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I mean, it's like nothing else in music history at this point. I mean, in rock history, at least. I mean,
yeah,
like most of the bands you're talking about, announce tours this far into their career and are playing greatest hit shows. And, there's nothing new or innovative about it, but they've made such an amazing catalog of music throughout the years that people just want to hear it. And
again and again. Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing in its own right. But, yeah, I mean, for musicians that have been playing together for so long to be continuously at this point in their career making writing new music, coming up with new ways of improvising, playing shows that are on par with anything that they've ever done in their 40-year career. It's totally unprecedented. I mean, we kind of almost, I don't want to say take it for granted, because we don't take it for granted, but it's like, that's what Phish does, you know, like you expect the unexpected. You expect them to, I mean, that's why we're all like in our mid 40s traveling across the country doing this stuff at this point, you know, like you just, it's a crazy, crazy situation with them. And it's, you know, it's what keeps it going. It's what keeps it fresh. It's what keeps
Yeah.
Phish being Phish at this point. You know, I don't think that they could ever be a band that just comes out and plays the songs that people want to hear. It's like that doesn't do it for them, you know. And after, when it comes down to it, you know, this is about, you know, them remaining excited and engaged to do this. And you know, they've consistently found ways throughout their career to keep themselves engaged and moving in a direction that excites them to step on the stage every night, and then that translates to us, you know.
Yeah, like I almost think, you know, if you like compare them to some of these bands that like have played, you know, in their 40th and 50th years, like Fish is at a point where like if they were one of those bands, you know, next year would be the year that they announce like for the 25th anniversary of fall 1997, Fish will play in the style of fall 1997 every night. And like that'd be the most ridiculous thing for them to do, but like, and they would never do it. And I wouldn't want them to do it because like the idea is what we were talking about earlier. It's like take little bits and pieces of the past and amalgamate them and then reshape them into this new idea of who we could be and where our heads are at right now, which like you're not buying a ticket to go and see the Rolling Stones try to figure out who the Rolling Stones are in 2021. Like you want to go and hear the Rolling Stones play like the Rolling Stones songs from the 1970s, you know, and
Yeah. No
like
doubt, no doubt.
it's something that I wonder sometimes like so you wrote extensively and I feel like the most you were writing was between like 2008 and 2015, 16. Do I have that
Yeah,
kind of right?
yeah, that makes sense. 15, I think.
Like one thing I loved and I would go back day after day to read your site for was you had this like so you had like a couple of things all together that I really enjoyed. Like you had a encyclopedic knowledge of Fish's history where I think I've told you this, but like like you would post like a show of the day type of thing in like 08, 09, and I would
Mhm.
download shows that I was just like, I have to hear this. Now I understand this show. Now I understand this period. And it served for me as a great way. Like I got into Fish in 2.0 and then I kind of fell out after Coventry and then I got really back into it in 3.0. But so like you had an encyclopedic understanding of Fish history. You also had this like just unbridled optimism that they could get back to where they were. And like there was always like in the tone of your writing was this like belief that like someday they're going to play a show that like nobody can hate on.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But you were
Yeah,
also like the last thing was like you also understood like criticism around like this is where they are right now in 2009, 2010. And so you would focus really heavily on these like what ultimately became like 3 to 4 minute moments in a show where it was like, okay, that tapped into something. That tapped
sure,
into something.
sure. Yeah.
I'm curious, like from your perspective now, like what has it been like to watch Fish like not only reach the heights, but like now create music on a night to night basis that I don't think any of us really would have imagined they would have been doing in 2010.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's freaking super sick. It's really it's really exciting. And you know, I think that like it's only built throughout. I mean, it's crazy to even say it's been 11 years or what, 12, 9,
12.
12 years at this point. I mean, that arc has, in my opinion, with just maybe a few tours that were a little bit of a dip, like been pretty steadily improving or moving upwards throughout the last 12 years. You know, when you know, if you look at like the first few years through 2012 as like kind of getting back up to speed, and then you look at kind of Dick's 2012 as being like the gateway to like the rest of the 3.0 era, where it felt like they were really now like, you know, those shows were super special, and I feel like they were a
Yeah.
culmination of the that year, but really the previous 3 years building to that
Yeah.
point. And then, you know, 13, you got that fall tour that's really innovative and really exciting, and everyone was super into, with a lot of awesome jams. And then, you know, you got the 15 tour after Fare Thee Well, and then the Baker's Dozen. Like, I feel like there's these benchmarks along the way that have been these like, you know, mini peaks of the era, or like, I guess there's been multiple peaks of the era. They're not many, but just several. And then it seems like, you know, this year could be another one of those years that we're talking about in 5 years, where like they completely rolled out something new and original, and created new jams, really even more than stylistically more unique than any of those other ones, really. uh, Maybe that's an overstatement, because I do think like 2015 has a really unique sound to it that,
Yeah.
you know, is not replicated before or after. The Baker's Dozen has a very unique sound to it. Even 2018, I feel like, has a very unique sound to it. But you know, now we're a new a new year, new sounds, new styles of improv. And you know, I look forward to seeing what they're going to do with these new sounds come fall. I mean, you know, I feel like fall always is where they take what happened in summer and kind of refine it, distill it, focus it into jams that are more advanced, maybe, or more, I don't know if that's the right word, but more, I don't know what the word is, but like you look at like, you know, historically, like you look at, and a perfect example is like summer 97, where you have this really raw, chunky style of funk playing, which they explored, you know, very thoroughly in the summer. And then they get to the fall and they really focus it in a new way, and
Yeah.
create jams that are far more involved and deeper on a whole than what we saw in the summer. And so, you know, when you extrapolate maybe that model to this summer, where there's also this really new style of play, like at many points during some of these jams this summer, I felt like Trey is up there like with like this, and it really kind of comes through in that little rig rundown he did. He's
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
all these new freaking sounds. And like, you know, I'm thinking watching that, like, how does he even freaking choose what he's gonna do? Like, you know, and in some of these jams, I feel like he's really just kind of going through his different sounds, like testing them out, seeing what sticks, and, you know, kind of moving from one sound, one effect to another throughout these jams. Sometimes even more quickly than I would think. You know, I like sometimes I'm like, oh, that could have stayed for a while longer. And so I feel like he was experimenting a lot this summer, you know, and kind of just like testing all of these new sounds out. And you know, he does it in a way that is incredibly tactical, and is able to both experiment and form these amazing jams within those experiments. But I feel like, I'm sure after this summer and after this tab tour that he's doing, which he's continuing to kind of move through this development of his new sound, I'm assuming he's going to come into fall with a lot more of a sense of a lot more of an understanding of his new rig.
Yeah.
You know, a lot more of experience under his belt, and he's going to be a lot more focused in how he employs the sounds. At least that's my thought. And I would imagine that would kind of be a conduit to like more um, a more focused development of the music within the fall jams. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but it seems like that would be the natural development of his own playing, you know. And I would imagine that the fall jams are going to be a natural extension and development of what we've seen over the summer. And given what we've seen over the summer, that's super exciting to think about.
Yeah, your analogy with summer and fall '97 is spot on, and I've thought about that in my head because one of the trends of the last 10 years is fall tours have seemed to more or less have a bit more interesting moments, a bit higher highs than some of their preceding summer tours. I think specifically like I enjoyed a lot of like summer 2013, but it felt like their band was in a very tight rotation. They would like dip their toes into really cool improvisational moments and then they would kind of retreat a little bit, and there were shows that were reminiscent of what you heard in early 3.0 at that point in time. And it was there was a slight like there was a lot of joy and there was a lot of great stuff on that tour, but there was also like a sense of frustration of like we heard you guys at Dick's last year. We know you can do it. Just like build on this. And then that fall tour, they come out and they play one of my three favorite tours of the last decade and a half.
Which one? 13 you're saying, or
Fall,
18?
fall 13, fall
13.
13.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think about fall 16 and fall 18 though, like summer tours had moments. I enjoyed summer 2018 much more than 2016, but I felt like those fall tours, like what you're talking about, the band was able to take a style and a sound and build on it.
Yeah, yeah.
And but the one thing we haven't had, which we have a potential for right now, is a really high quality, like strong tour from start to finish in the summer that's then followed by a fall. Like I don't feel like we've had that since the late 1990s where the band comes out and we have an opportunity for like a tour that is raises expectations all over again in a way that we can't even really begin to like ferment right now.
Sure. I thought 2018 was more like that than what you're giving it credit for. I thought
It's fair.
summer 2018 was pretty freaking awesome, and then fall 18 kind of took a lot of the new sounds and built off of them. Um, but yeah, like I think that in terms of like a summer tour presenting a completely new improvisational paradigm, then yes, I don't think we've seen that since really like, the late 90s.
Yeah.
But I think I agree with you in what you're saying is that there's this whole new thing right now, that they've been working on all summer
Yeah.
that we're going to see them push beyond where they were this summer in the fall. And so, yeah, I mean, albeit 2018 did have new sounds to it, it wasn't as extreme as this,
Right.
in terms of like completely new style of jamming. And so I would, yeah, it's an exciting moment right now to have these shows on deck in a couple weeks. Also, it's just so close to summer, there really
Right.
wasn't much of a break. Trey's continued playing, and so I don't foresee there being a huge, you know, uh, you know, getting back on the horse period. I feel like they'll probably hit the ground running for the most part. And so, um, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of really cool potential that we're like on the brink of uncovering here.
Yeah, I mean, you've got this like combination of a raw, very new sound that I feel like in some cases the band has explored. But I think one thing we talked about probably 25, 30 minutes ago was like it never felt like it became, rote, or it never felt like it became like they fell back on a crutch and said, okay, this is what this sound leads to during summer 2021. So in some cases, it feels like they haven't found the bottom of this new sound.
No, yeah,
Plus,
not at all.
like plus there's Halloween looming and we have no idea what Phish is going to play on Halloween and how that may be informing. And I think back to like I feel like summer 24 or fall 2014, excuse me, was a good representation of this where like if you go back and listen to some of those fall 2014, like the good jams from that, especially from like Bill Graham through Vegas, but before the Halloween show, you hear elements of the Chilling Thrilling songs in some of those jams, and you hear the band kind of toying with it, but nobody knows what they're playing, but it's like
Mhm.
helping them to get to that next space.
Mhm.
We have no idea what, if they're playing a cover album, if they're playing a new album, how it's affecting their approach right now, or how it's going to affect them in the fall. And then we have no idea what that's going to affect them when they get to MSG or when they get to Mexico. Like, I think about Chilling Thrilling or Casual Vox, or, even the Wingsuit set to a large degree. Like, those were sets that like made you rethink where Phish was at that period in time. And it
Yeah.
affected who they were and how they were playing over the concurrent tours.
Yeah, no, fundamentally, I agree. Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to speculate on that until we see what happens. But
Right.
yeah, that's kind of the fun of it all. Um, yeah, I don't know. I just kind of assume they're going to do something original and new. I don't know. That maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like a cover album is a little bit passe at this point.
I mean, what do you cover at this point? Like,
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, who knows? That's probably as I said, they're gonna do what you least expect, and so maybe I'm wrong. But yeah, I don't know. I think there's as I said, I think we're on the brink of some serious Phish right now, and I think that's super exciting.
yeah, I agree. Any last thoughts you have about summer 2021 and kind of where the band is before we look backwards for a minute?
Um, I don't know. I guess I'll just like reiterate like these like this like two-pronged attack that they have at this point. Like, one of the jams I love, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it, is the Atlantic City Tweezer. And that is a jam that, for the most part, remains in like their classic sound. Like, it's really just like big festival style, like anthemic Phish music, and it's incredible. And it really shows like, we spend so much time talking about the new developments in their sound, but like there's also moments in this summer that kind of stay anchored in their classic sound and yet still feel completely fresh, and their playing is very original within that whole paradigm. And it's just so cool that they can really just like code switch between the two sounds, almost, I mean, not even almost, but instantaneously on stage, whether it's between different jams or even within one jam. And it just really like broadens what they're capable of at this point. And so I just feel like they're in a great place. And I'm pretty sure they would agree, is that they're just, I think they're in a, I couldn't have imagined they would be at such an awesome place right now, you know, thinking back a few months ago. It's just, and it just speaks to how you just never know with them, man. Like, they just keep pushing forward. And it's just a situation where you just kind of got to put yourself there and see what happens. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. Like, there's like expectations are almost like fruitless at this point. Like, there's no way to even expect or predict what they're going to do. And so it's just it's just really cool that we're at another one of these points of innovation so quickly after they'd come back, and it's what I was hoping would happen. And honestly, it's what's happened. So it's really exciting.
Two things. So you're the second person who's Phish Insights I trust above most others who has recommended the Atlantic City Tweezer, which was a jam that I loved the way that they left Tweezer, and it was like silent and just like so groove driven.
Oh
But
yeah, that
then
shit is just like pure fish crack at that. Those first 7 minutes of that jam are
yeah.
like fucking. That's my shit right there. But then
Um
it just keeps. Well, you go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say, like, it fell flat for me, but the way that you're talking about it is it's a totally new perspective for me, because what you're talking about is kind of what we began this conversation with, which is like this idea of new Phish and old Phish kind of colliding. And you're absolutely right. Like it sounds like a Phish approach from like the mid 1990s, where you come out with this groove and then they just go into like a very classic rock peak. And what else do you need sometimes? And
But then they, after the classic rock peak, they move into like a more major key blissful area and they peak
totally,
that. And then at the end, they move into a more new school section. It's like, it's got a lot going on in it. And, but just like, like I said earlier, it's like, while I mean, you know, we're talking so much about this innovative sound and new school palette of sounds. It's like, that doesn't diminish how much I love just like a classic anthemic
totally. Yeah, no, that's a good
festival
point.
size Phish jam. And that's what it was. It has so much space in the music, like you're like
Yeah.
swimming in the notes, and it's just
Yeah.
like, it's just it brought me back. Like I felt like I was at the AC shows, and I felt like I was at like some mid 90s festival where they're just like,
Interesting.
I don't know, it's just it was, I love that jam, and I've gone back and listened to that as much, if not more, than most things this summer. And it's just something that, like, each time I play it, it's just like, I don't know, it feels like home in a way.
I'm gonna listen to it with newfound ears, because I got that from the first part, but you're making me think about it in a different way, which I really appreciate. And I love that whenever you're in a moment where you're like, I don't know, like what other people see in this, but then you hear that one thing and you're like, okay, I'm gonna listen to it like that, and it may completely change the way that I hear the jam.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because like when I think back on this tour, and I think that one of the things that's going to be really interesting about this tour in as time goes on, and a lot of this depends on what happens with fall. Um, but as time goes on, is you have moments like that, and you have the fact that someone said here in the chat, and it's totally true. It's a golden era for Tweezer. Um, some of the best years of 3.0, obviously in the 90s, but of 3.0 have been defined by the band is jamming really well and Tweezer gets the treatment as well. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think of like summer 2015, every Tweezer that was played was like classic.
Oh yeah,
And it
dude.
was
Me and my buddy talk about the 2015 tweezers all the time. They're all completely unique from one another, and they're all like absolutely elite. Like the Lakewood Blossom, Alpine, and Magnaball are all like just top shelf, and every one of
yeah,
those jams is completely in a different direction, and they're
right.
all just so good. And like we always joke about like, which one's the best? Well, the one you're listening to at that moment's the best, because they're all the best, like they're all so freaking good. And this summer again, like you had the AC, you had the Shoreline Tweezer, you had the Alpharetta Tweezer, all just these like super peak versions of the song. It's really exciting in that respect, for
Well,
sure.
it's amazing how that song, like at the end of the day, like there's obviously a recorded version of Tweezer on a picture of Nectar, but like
I don't
Tweezer's
know
not
that
a
I've ever heard
song.
that, frankly.
It's actually worth it. There's a good, it's like a very early 90s rock peak from Trey.
Yes, yeah.
It's worth it. But like it's not a song, like it's a riff with ridiculous lyrics that like just leads to a jam. Like that's the only purpose that the song holds.
Oh yeah,
And
one
like
hundred percent.
wherever Phish goes, that song is there. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a
you
mirror for
know,
sure for whatever they're doing at that time, no doubt.
but then
Um,
in the same regard, you have like, I feel like Phish of 5, 6, 7 years ago would have, if they were playing really good tweezers, would have played like that tweezer at Shoreline and then been like, okay, we have to play a tweezer at Dick's because we're playing it really well. And in this like complete zag of where Phish was at, or Phish is at right now in 2021, there's no tweezer at Dick's. There's no Mike song at Dick's. There's no there's so many of these staples are missing. There's no Down with Disease at Dick's for I think the first time ever.
I didn't
And
notice that, huh?
and instead you get Everything's Right, Set Your Soul Free, Sigma Oasis, Carini, which is an older song, but like has gone through these like recent periods of revivalism. Like it's almost like Phish is, to your point earlier, like it's this old school, new school Phish where like they don't have to play Tweezer to get to that point, even though they
No,
just played a brilliant Tweezer 4 shows earlier.
yeah, no doubt. I mean, they just have so many launch pads at this point, you know. Um, it's cool in that respect, is that they can take all these new songs to places that they could take all the old songs to. And so it's like, you know, where they start from is highly irrelevant at some point. Although I'll always take a Tweezer at any given moment for sure.
Yeah, I mean they start it and you're celebrating.
Yeah.
I wanna I want to transition really quickly and talk about, we have a couple last topics that we wanted to run through here that I think could lead to some really cool discussion as well. And I want to thank everyone out there who's hanging out with us midday. I hope everyone's having an incredible Friday. Thank you all for watching along and hanging with us. We've been talking so much about 2021 and where 2021 lives in larger Phish history. And one thing that, you know, I've enjoyed in our back and forth over the last couple of weeks is where we have moments that we and this is one thing that like you did really well on your site. Like, where do you have moments where not as many people are talking about a tour or show or an era, but you really, you know, spend a lot of time in? And so I wanted to ask you, and I think we both have an idea for this. What is a past tour that you wish received more recognition and exploration from the fan base, and that you tend to spend a lot of time listening to?
Yeah. You know, I frankly don't care what people pay attention to and what they don't, but something that surprises me, something that surprises me sometimes is that Fall 98 doesn't get mentioned as much in these like historical conversations as you know, so much attention, and rightfully so, is paid to Fall 97. I mean, that's a huge, like, and that's, you know, a whole nother conversation. And so much attention gets paid to Summer 98, also rightfully so, and I love both of those tours. However, it seems like Fall 98 is a little bit of an afterthought for some people. And I really find that that is a tour where they, you know, the previous couple tours, 97, Fall 97, 98, were, you know, very focused on groove bass playing. And I mean, granted that Summer, and I feel like that's a bit of an oversimplification for Summer 97. I mean, that has so many deep, like, psychedelic jams in it as well. It's not just like, I feel like that's a misnomer for Summer 90, for Fall 97, actually, is that, you know, people often say that it is just all these grooves, and it's like the farthest thing from the truth. But a lot of it,
Listen to the Vegas stash.
yeah, I love that. I love that jam.
Me
All
too.
the stashes from all the stashes from Fall 97 are so sick.
Yeah.
Every one. And so I just feel like in Fall 98 they introduce a new style of jamming. You know, that's kind of seems to be like a topic that we're talking about in terms of this summer. But like Fall 98 is when they really start integrating a you know, an ambient amorphous style of improv where it's less rhythmically driven and more abstract, impressionistic type of music that they hadn't really gotten into at any point in their career previously. Before that, most of their abstract jams are very like spacey and spacious. If you think about like Summer 95, and there's like a lot of like, it's not super cohesive in the moment. Like it's very expansive. I don't want to say it's not cohesive because that's not giving it credit for what it is, but the style in itself just is very expansive and more driven by like real space. I don't know. I'm not really articulating this very well, but this Fall 98 jams that I'm talking about are like very cohesive and like glued, and the band is just like pushing and pulling the music collectively in a way that they had never done before. When you look at, you know, jams like there's the Greek Theater Reba on the first night, there's a Wolfman's from Vegas, there's the Simple from Hampton, there's the AC/DC Bag from UIC. Throughout that whole run, they've just really integrated a completely new style of jamming that would inform a completely new tangent moving forward. And I just feel like maybe that music doesn't speak to large portions of the community as much as it does to me, but I feel like that tour is incredibly innovative, and maybe while some of the set structure within that tour is not as dialed as Fall '97, which in my opinion is like the peak of them like combining improv with set structure to create
Yeah.
like artistic 90 or 60 to they're shorter that summer that fall, like 60 to 80-minute statements of music. Well, maybe like that element is not quite as strong in fall '98. The jams that they're rolling out, are really just super sick and super new, and really gripped me immediately. And so I guess if I were to pick a tour that I kind of like feel like should be recognized for its innovative qualities more than it is, it would be that one.
Yeah, it's interesting, like, you're talking about, like, whenever I hear 98, I think about it as, like, part of this larger goal that, in my mind, the band had post December '95. Like, I feel like you go back to December '95 and, like, they walk off stage on Madison Square Garden, 12/31. Fish could have called it quits and been a band that, like, we're still talking about 26 years later
Yeah,
and
yeah,
still
yeah,
analyzing, like, what was this show and what was this show and what was going on in this tour. Like, you think about how many alternative rock and indie bands rose in the '90s and then broke up, and people are still talking about today. Like, Fish could have been that, where it was literally just a '90s band, and they made this uh, decision, this very intentional decision, to completely change their sound, and that led to a lot of challenges within their music. It led to parts of 1996, and we'll get into latter parts of 1996, but parts of 1996 where it sounded kind of flat, and it sounded like they were slightly directionless, and they were just like playing Fish music without really like innovating in the way that they had been 8-9 months earlier. And then they tap into this groove based sound, and they bring that to Europe. They come back, they have this very raw summer tour, they have this fully locked in fall tour in 1997. And then it was like, where do we go from here? And it felt to me like they leaned into that sound and understood that the biggest musical accomplishment that they could make with the sound that they had was playing as like one unified instrument.
yeah, yeah,
And that goal of the ambient jam at the end of Lemon Wheel of night one of the Lemon Wheel
yeah,
is like, that's to me the birth of it, where they found
yeah,
like,
yeah. And then the Ghost the next night, where they employ
yes,
that.
oh my god,
That
yes,
shit's
oh
the
my god.
greatest. Yeah,
And like they're also, mixed in with this was this sense of like early '90s Fish is the whole band matters. I don't want to say anything blasphemous, but it's Trey. Like, you're going to see Trey, this like absolutely generational talent, rip it up on guitar. And there's this conscious moment where he wants to step back. Like, in parts of 1996, he's like hiding behind his amplifier and playing a freaking drum kit so
totally.
that like his guitar isn't front and center.
Yeah,
And they
yeah,
figure that out. And you get that in '98, like that Reba
yeah,
you talked about.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I just think that
Wolfman.
like so many of those jams are some of like there's just some of my favorite. I mean, it's kind of my one of if not my favorite style of Fish is when they really take it out and stretch the music in ways that is very unconventional for them. And at that point it was like completely new. And um we hear echoes of that stuff now, even like when you think about
Yeah.
the Sigma Oasis jam that happened in the last show, that is like of that style in the sonic space of like 2021. And there's so many different examples of that throughout post 98 Fish. It really just introduced a new way of interacting for them. And
The waves from
it's
it.
what's that?
The waves from it. Like,
Yeah,
it's
that's
like they're
another one.
channeling
Yeah,
that sound.
you can literally go through the different eras of Phish and see how that type of improv has kind of had ripple effects throughout. And those types of jams are the ones I gravitate to so strongly. Um, and so it's just like, throughout their career, and specifically throughout the like mid to late 90s, they just keep every tour adding something else to their repertoire, adding something else to their repertoire, which at some point, they just have this, huge catalog of sounds and jamming styles which they can kind of dip into at any point. And more than ever in the 3.0 era, we've heard them do that. Like, it's
Yeah.
less of a evolution from tour to tour, like we've mentioned before, and more of a like kind of like going into their bag of tricks, pulling one piece out, and then adding another type of style to it within a certain jam or within a certain show. And maybe now this year we're seeing maybe an addition, like another point in their career where they're gonna be adding a new style of conversation to their bag of tricks, if you will. And so that's what was so exciting about them back in the late 90s, is that like each tour they were adding more to their mixture and evolving at the same time. It was like very much on a continuum. Like when you talk about Halloween 96 being really the start of this evolution, this post 95 evolution, it really kind of starts at the Halloween show and kind of peaks, in Japan in 2000. And you can kind of take a thread all the way through those years and see how each tour builds on and evolves the sound of the previous one, adds to it. And it's just, it correlates very directly from one tour, one era, one year to the next. And so, that fall 98 was one part of that evolution that I particularly enjoy.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned Halloween 96 because you're absolutely right. Like, that's where, you know, whatever wandering, whatever, like, whatever they were doing from January 1st, 1996 to Halloween 1996, like, changes on a dime there. And for
Yeah,
this, for this like question, like my thought was fall 1996 is the tour that I wish like
yeah,
was discussed more, because to me October has its moments. There's a Simple from Charlotte, there's
yeah.
a
I love
couple
that shit.
moments in the MSG run, great Simple.
Yeah,
um but like when they play Remain in Light, which is a Eno informed Talking Heads record,
yeah,
and then they come out 2 nights later and they play that Cross-Eyed and Painless to open the second set of the Coral Sky show. There is a completely new sound and a completely new approach to music that was not there 3 nights earlier
right.
and was not there over the summer. Clifford Ball, totally joyful, amazing event where I'm sure to walk into the Clifford Ball and see that there are 80,000 people like you was just like, what the hell is going on? Pre-internet type of thing. But like that Cross-Eyed and Painless, the Mike song from Knoxville, the Gin from Lexington, there's Simples from Champaign and Memphis.
Hmm.
Um, there is the Omaha second set that has like a crazy abstract runaway gym that goes into like Vibrational Life and Kung.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
you end with like this massive Down with Disease. There's in Seattle a couple weeks later, like it's this tour that you hear elements of the arena rock sound that was like big and expansive from fall 1995, where like the Who
yeah,
was informing them,
yeah,
mixed with this rhythmic interplay that now Talking Heads are informing of them.
yeah,
And it's all completely like new night to night because it's
yeah.
a sound that the band has never really tapped into and never really like you know never really figured out like a way to present on a night to night basis, which would then become the defining sound for the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, definitely. There were definitely like these two uh two improvisational directions at that time. Like there was kind of like like you're saying, the arena rock psych playing that kind of was like a leftover or like kind of carrying past through from 95 forward. Um, and then you had like the new groove playing at the same time in that November show, in those November shows. Like some of the jams that I've always kind of benchmarked as like an evolution in the groove playing is like the Auburn Hills Yem, the Grand Rapids Tweezer,
Yeah.
San Diego Mike's song, and also like the Vegas 2001. It's like you can really hear like what is about to happen, you know,
Yeah.
like they're kind of discovering it as it's going, but at the same time they still have this momentum from 95, this arena rock momentum, that, and so you really get this combination, like you're saying, of sounds in the back half of that fall 96 tour that creates a real exciting night to night, you know, progression, and also like, you know, this like dichotomy of Phish in the moment where like they're moving forward, they're kind of still have these ripple effects from their like peak of fall 95, and it's this very interesting in between time in their career. And then, you know, obviously when we next see them come, you know, spring in Europe, they're starting to really develop the groove playing, and then like really for the next year it becomes like the main focus for them. And so yeah, I think that is also, I mean, I think 96 as a whole is kind of glossed over a lot.
Yeah.
And even, you know, I think there's a lot of good stuff that summer, even though it's like, you know, maybe not like super new. There's a lot of good play in that summer as well, but like that first month of fall is definitely a little flat, where they're
Yeah.
like they're probably practicing the Remain in Light stuff behind stage, or you know, off the stage, and like they're coming to the shows and kind of just like playing the shows without integrating that sound into it. And then once it happens, it like really kind of just immediately starts informing their new direction. And that's really the start of, you know, the rest of 1.0.
I wonder, like, that's a really good point about like the flatness of the early part of that fall tour, and then they play Remain in Light, and it's like immediately it's a completely different band. I almost wonder if they were like, if there was an aspect of them that was nervous that if we give, and this is, you know, 25 years ago, it's hard to get a true sense of where the band's heads were, but like if there was like if there were nerves that like, well, if we go into this style of jamming, it's going to give away what the album is. Cause I believe that that was the first Halloween where there was no voting. It was just the band decides.
Right,
You
right, right.
walked in, you got the playbill.
Totally.
Um, and I wonder in a sense if like from their perspective, let's hold off. Like we know what's coming, but we don't know how it's going to impact us. But like we can't give this away, And then they walk out on stage in Coral Sky, and suddenly you all know what we're playing, or we already played it, and now we're just going to apply it to our music, and we're
Yeah,
going to play
it's
this
very
cover song
possible.
again.
It's very possible. Yeah, I mean, it was very clear that they were consciously not going into that style of playing, and we obviously know they were practicing it. So, you know, obviously that probably lends to a little bit of the blandness of that opening month.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, when I think of Fall 96, you know, I pretty much think of Halloween moving forward after that. That first month doesn't really like, you know, register to me. And those are the shows that I actually saw. Is like that first month I was in school on the East Coast, and I saw most of that first run through Halloween, and I wasn't able to go beyond that. And so I kind of like listened to the rest of the Fall 96 through tapes and whatnot, but like really very clearly hearing the influence and evolution of their sound from that moment forward.
Yeah, and it's interesting that we both picked like the tours that kind of bookend this, what is thought, a lot of cases like a peak period for Fish. Obviously, like I said it before on this conversation, like you say the words Fall 97 and the entire fan base is, face lights up. But like to get there, you've got 1996, this kind of lost band that's trying to figure out how to reinvent itself, figures out a way via this cover album. And then 1998 is almost this, how do we extend this sound that we had discovered and that we played in this really like propulsive way a year earlier that like blew up arenas. How do we evolve that so we're not just playing that sound over and over and over again? Because I got to imagine by the end of 1997, they were slightly like, not every jam needs to go into a funk jam. And you
Right.
hear it almost like night one of the Island tour when they go into that twist that has aspects that are similar to like moments in Fall 97 tour, but also sounds like a completely new band at the same time.
Oh yeah. I mean, Island Run is like a thing to itself. That's my favorite. That's my favorite four nights of all time. But yeah, I mean, and like I don't see it stopping in '98. I feel like they evolved it even more in '99 to another place where it's
Totally.
like more hypnotic and more drone based and like more repetitive, and that's where they really start integrating like the electronic music theory into their jamming, and it's like they become it's more like consciously like dance based like rhythms. Um, but yeah, I mean, I've always said that I see like, that whole era on a continuum where like you can't really take one part of it away because it all informs each other. And then, that final peak of creativity happens in Japan. And then I feel like the summer and fall of 2000 are kind of like coming down the hill from that final peak and into the hiatus, which probably was appropriate at the time. Um, but yeah, I mean, I find like following that evolution really interesting, and it's a lot about what I've written about in the past. And not to say, and even like the earlier Fish, like you can even trace like the evolution and the progression of their styles from like spring '92 through summer '93 to spring '94 to fall '94 and then summer '95. It's like it all it all very clearly connects. And
Yeah,
then
it does.
it resets in Halloween. Like the evolution kind
Yeah.
of resets in Halloween '96. You
Yeah, it's
kind of
interesting. Like,
see. Sorry, I kind of see like spring '92 to fall '95 as like one period of evolution.
yeah,
Maybe even summer '93 to fall '95 would be a more tight period of time. And then '96 is this in between time, and then '96 Halloween to 2000 Japan is like the second era of evolution where everything
yeah.
is very traceable and related.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. Like when we made the first season of Undermine, we did it all in the '80s, and I listened to so many '80s Fish
Oh
shows.
my god!
I basically went through like a 3 month period in time where the only thing I listened to were '80s Fish shows, and it's fascinating to listen to like that band at that era because you hear these little snippets of Fish in the '90s, but just completely without direction.
Right, right,
You
right,
hear a band playing a 27-minute long jam, but not knowing how to like properly move out of a the song segment and build the jam up. It's just like a lot of like little segments of jams, and their shows are very strangely constructed because it's all just classic old Fish songs. So like, you know, McGrupp and Yem are right next to each other, and like Harry Hood is like opening up all these shows in a way that like it wouldn't until very special moments in late 1.0. And then they tighten everything up. 89 to 91 is very tight. I agree with you. I would put 92 as the start of that evolution to 95.
hmm
I've listened to that entire spring 1992
Yeah,
tour,
that's
and
a
it's,
great run.
I mean, the mid April California run
Yeah,
where they're dipping their toes into jamming, but still playing like 27, 28 songs a night. Every show has a Fishman gag.
yeah,
Every
yeah,
show either has like Mike's song or Tweezer. Um, but yeah, then like they build up to 95, and at some point in 1995 you have to, I don't know how you play a show like 12/31/95 and not say we need to reinvent ourselves, like,
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's clearly the peak of everything for sure.
right, right. It'd be fun to do one of these where we literally just like track through year by year and just like figure out the puzzle of Fish.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I mean,
um
it's all just it's very interesting to track, and it's very I don't want to say obvious, but it's very clear how things develop.
yeah, yeah, and then the kind of mirroring of it in early 2.0 where they, or excuse me, in early 3.0 where they said, okay, we've got to go back to basics and figure out how to rebuild this whole thing. Um, Before we go, And I want to thank everyone who's hanging with us here again. Thank you all for your comments. I keep getting requests to mention Jen Kessler, so I'm going to give Jen Kessler a huge shout out here. Apparently, I should be. But I want to ask you, one of the things that you did on your blog that was so fantastic, I said this earlier, was you would highlight, and you really, really did this in like 08, 09, 2010. I filled up an entire external hard drive based on this, where you would throw a historic Phish show on, usually, and I would say almost exclusively, something that had not been officially released,
Right.
something that was a show that everyone had to listen to understand Phish, but was not getting, amplified for a variety of reasons. And I filled up, like I said, an external hard drive of this stuff and like discovered shows that like I probably would have discovered without this. I want to ask you in this setting to pick a show, any show that you recommend our listeners here to listen to after this.
Cool. I'm going to stick with my Fall 98 vibe because there's a show on Fall 98 that I feel I've absolutely adored and listened to death, but like just doesn't get mentioned very much. And that's the absolute first show at the Greek Theater in LA for Fall 98. They play a relatively mellow warm up first set. And then the second set is absolutely insane. And it really, it's the centerpiece of the set is this deep, deep psych exploration comes out of Reba, which is completely atypical and like nothing that's ever happened in the song before or since. And it is one of my favorite Phish jams of all time. And it also is the first part of a segment of that second set that is like really impeccable. It goes Reba, Walk Away, Simple, Bowie. And it's just super powerful and really sets the tone for the style of jamming that I just discussed for Fall 98. And I think maybe it doesn't get quite as much recognition, maybe because the next two nights, literally, it's the 29th, and the next two nights are the Vegas run, which were so, right. Everyone came to the Vegas run and is very, it's been released on live Phish and whatnot. And it's incredible. And it deserves everything that it gets. Absolutely adore those shows, specifically that Wolfman's. But for some reason, like even on like the countless number of live Bates and archive shows that have been released, that Reba is like sitting out there as like this jewel of like Phish jamming that has just never been put out to the public other than like whatever audience tapes are out there and sitting in people's DAT collections at this point. And it's I highly encourage anyone and everyone to listen to that second set. If you're not familiar with it, you're in for a hell of a treat. And if you are familiar with it and haven't listened to it in a long time, you're going to be reminded of just how ridiculous it is. But 10/29/98 would be my call for like the dark horse freaking recommendation for sure.
Yeah, I second that. That's an incredible show. And yeah, the sound quality on the audience tape that I've listened to on re-listen, like it's begging for a soundboard because
It's just, I mean, that Reba is just like as good as it gets. And it
yes.
just seems to live in like the background of that entire tour. And I have never necessarily understood why. Like, I feel like at different points I've like tweeted to Shapiro to release it on one of the on the mixes he puts out, and it's just still out there. But nonetheless, I mean, you can still get the gist of everything through the audience tapes that's out there for sure. I don't know about the re-listen copy specifically, but I
feel like Fall 98 is one of those tours as well that like when they released the Grand Rapids show from a couple years ago, that's got like Incredible Haleys.
Yeah.
There's a gumbo in set one.
Oh yeah, that's awesome.
Like I listened to it on an audience copy and I was like, okay, it's a good ambient jam. And then I listened to it on a soundboard and I was like, I hear things I've never heard before in this jam.
Yeah. That's always been a show. That's always been a version that like I put on mixtapes since it happened back in the day, like from my DATs and whatnot. That's a great freaking great rendition. But yeah, like so much of like, you know, it depended on the arena and the mic
Yeah.
placements and the mic qualities, like what tapes are getting put out there, you know, and circulated. But like a lot of jams that are super nuanced and quiet kind of gain a new life when they put it out with the soundboard quality, you know, because like we never spent our whole lives listening to it through audience tapes and know it backwards and forwards that way. But then when you hear it through the soundboard, it's a lot comes out, and that's a great example of one. I was super psyched they released that show because that's one of the shows that I've always listened to so much that, you know,
Yeah.
both sets of that show are really awesome.
Yeah, and I just that tour, it's similar for 99 and 2000 shows. Like 97, the sound is so pronounced that even when they get into subtleties, like those 97 fall tours, you could listen to those in audience tape and still be completely satisfied with like the sound quality. But like 98, 99, 2000, there's so much nuance in what they're
Hmm.
playing night to night that like when you get a soundboard recording, you hear like these little notes that Mike is playing, or like what like chords Trey's doing, or like Page at the Rhodes, where like it's sounds that just add to it that you wouldn't get if like, you know, and this is my preferred way to listen to Phish is through audience tapes because I love hearing the room and I love hearing like how the night felt rather than just
Yeah.
like through the soundboard. But like there's something about the 98, 99, 2000 sounds that like I think of like the Darien Drowned from 2000 that like you
Okay.
have to hear like what the band was doing at like the quietest moments.
Yeah. 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 That's a ridiculous jam. Absolutely. But I feel like the thing is like I feel like they've done a really good job of getting most of the crucial jams out in soundboard, and just that Reba for
Except
some
this
reason
Reba.
not one of them. And I don't understand it. But I don't know. They're playing an LA show this run, so maybe in the live bait it's possible this
Ooh, that's a
time.
good call.
You know,
That's a
like
good call.
so who knows? But I don't know. It's definitely worthy. That's the understatement.
Well, yes, I will second your recommendation. I will just add to this in a similar like show that I don't hear anyone talking about, but I absolutely love is April 24th, 1994 from Charlotte, North Carolina. We were talking before we went live, like Spring 94 is one of those tours, like I feel like there's a lot of attention paid to obviously the Bomb Factory, um, but then like June and July. And there's rightly so. You've got two game henges in June. You've got the great UIC show. You've got the OJ show. You have the 7/13/94, the Patterson, New York Big Birch
Yeah, yeah,
show,
yeah, yeah.
um, tour finale, live Phish show too. You've got a lot of moments that are, you know, really noteworthy. And I feel like Spring 94 kind of gets overlooked for there were a lot of Hoist songs. There was a lot of like kind of similar set listing that still feels a part of like Spring 92 and Spring 93 in some cases. But
Hmm.
this show, huge shout out to Rob Mitchum, who is another fantastic writer about Phish, and really just great like mind about Phish. He recommended this show. um I heard about it maybe a decade ago. I'd never listened to it before this, but as kind of one of those shows where you can hear the shift from 93, 94 to fall 94, 95. And you specifically hear it in the first set. It's a really great set list, number one, but you hear about it in the first set. Bathtub Gin goes into Jump Monk, back into Bathtub Gin. And then in the second set, specifically, and of note, it's the first Jump Monk since March 12th, 1988, which was 727 shows at that point. In 6 years, they played almost 800 shows, like just mind blowing to think about now.
Yeah,
um, but the David Bowie is described on the Fishnet Jam chart as the first big 94 Bowie. It's an unbelievable journey of music and improvisation, spine tingling at times and thrilling by the conclusion, and the best was yet to come. And like you hear in this Bowie that it is where the band just jumps off the cliff to see
yeah,
what's possible. And
totally.
we would hear it a couple weeks later at the Bomb Factory, but like this is a show that if you want to hear where Phish moved towards late 94, summer 95 Phish, this is where it happens.
Yeah, that version of Bowie is actually kind of like a culmination of the earlier versions from the tour. I mean, Spring '94 as a whole is like you start to see the band kind of take the really tightly wound like speed jazz of 93 and start to push it outwards into like, more slightly more abstract territory. And you see the development specifically within David Bowie jams and a lot of Antelope jams too. That's spring, but specifically the Bowie jams from earlier in that run, and then that Grady Cole version that you're talking about really kind of was the version that all these other ones were kind of pointing towards, and kind of becomes this like kind of like a hallmark of their explorational style at that point, and also a foreshadowing of how much further it was going to go come fall, which,
Yeah.
as we know, is like really when they started pushing things beyond any place they had been before. But like I really do feel like that spring tour is a cool middle ground between summer 93 and like that style of like really just like kind of tight communication where they're like echoing each other and like responding to each other in a almost jazz style way, and like the more expansive psychedelic playing that would come in fall 94, where they'd start to really push things to like 20-30 minute tweezers and whatnot. And that spring is like a sweet spot that exists within these two places. And there's a lot of really cool playing in that tour that I guess like at some point in my past I discovered and was really into for a while. Like it's a very cool middle ground.
Yeah, it's classic Phish. It's kind of like we were talking about in some cases 2021, but it's also like they're not jamming on a nightly basis. Like you're having jams like in little bits and pieces, but it's like
Yeah.
you could listen to any Spring 94 show and almost feel like this is the sound of Phish. Like this is that really warm, bright, goofy, but absolutely shredding, somewhat experimental. Oh my God, are they playing a bluegrass song? What the hell is happening? Right. Like it's just so all over the place in terms of like it's a showcase of their styles.
Yeah.
And yet,
Yeah.
like the band sounded like they were on the precipice of something completely new. And listening to this show, you get that sense of like a band that is starting to get comfortable with incorporating whatever they're doing behind the scenes at sound checks and in tour rehearsals, getting to the point of being like, okay, that uh I think that uh whatever risks we're taking behind the scenes, we can take in front of a paying audience, and they're not going to leave us. Like,
Yeah.
and I almost wonder like that fear and that I don't know if it was a fear, but like that decision to start to reincorporate true, expansive, like wild exploration, and know that they were not going to lose fans.
Mm-hmm.
Like from a business standpoint, is just like such a fascinating decision because, as we know, by doing that, they started moving into arenas and they started becoming a like true arena touring rock band, not by playing this safe music that you hear in early parts of Spring 94. That's still a ton of fun, but is like
Yeah.
nothing close to what they would play in November.
Yeah. No, 100%. I agree.
Well, Dave, this was fantastic.
Yeah. Super fun.
Thank you. Thank you so much
Thanks for having me.
for hanging with me here. We've gone almost 2 hours. Thank you to everyone who has hung out and listened. I hope that this was like a good lunch break for people. And like, if you're busting out end of the week emails, whatever you may be doing, like I'm hoping that that this was a good compliment here at the end of the week. I enjoyed talking with you, Dave. This was awesome. We ran through a ton of summer 2021. We talked about fall 98, fall 96, as well as kind of ended on two shows that we recommend everyone listens to: 10/29/98 as well as 4/24/94. So thank you to everyone out there for hanging with us, and thank you, man, for
Yeah.
this was great to talk.
Absolutely, man. My pleasure. I'm glad we did it, and look forward to doing it again at some point.
Awesome, dude. We will do this, and I hope to see you out on tour, man.
Yeah, let's try to connect this fall. Absolutely.
That would be great. All right, everyone, have a great day. Enjoy your weekend, and we will talk here soon.
Sounds good. Take it easy, people. Bye.